The war was over, and for the first time in 3 years, Commander Elias Rourke stepped onto soil that wasn't scorched or cratered or humming with the static of ruined technology. The base at New Dakar welcomed him with brass salutes, sealed, reports, and a silence too loud for comfort, and yet he returned not with pride but with a heavy hollowness in his chest, a weight he could neither name nor shake. He had survived the siege of Antares Ridge, the orbital bombardments at Kaelari, Prime, and the mass purging of the Varian capital spires, and for this they called him hero. The Earth Alliance High Command had already prepared a set of medals he hadn't asked for, and a home he no longer remembered requesting. Still, they gave, and he accepted, because that was the shape of duty. Receive what was given, carry what could not be refused. When they summoned him to the Commandant's hall, he thought perhaps it was another interview, another debrief, another chance to scrub the truth into something palatable for the Earth networks. But what he received instead was a file, no words, just a thin, flat chip slipped into his palm by a sharp-eyed officer who said, "Your reward, sir. Asset delivery confirmed at 0300. Read the conditions before that." And then they saluted him and left, like this was normal, like this was protocol. He didn't check the chip until he was alone in the estate's glass-walled study, surrounded by polished floors, automated shadows, and the soft whisper of air that didn't carry the scent of burnt ozone or blood. The file wasn't long, 2 pages redacted in parts and clinical in language. One name, Kaelari, species, Varian, female, genetic classification, anomalous, status, non-combatant asset, rehomed as personal reward under Directive 7.9.3, terms of ownership indefinite, behavioral conditioning minimal, emotional compliance unknown, recommended protocol, treat as dependent not equal. Rourke read it twice, once with disbelief and again with rising disgust. They had given him a person, not a servant, not a citizen of the defeated, a reward, like one might receive a sculpture or a bottle of rare Martian wine, an alien woman, likely young, sent to him without consent or voice or even an explanation worth the breath it would take to deliver. The irony burned bitter in his throat. He had fought this war under banners of civilization and advancement, under the illusion that Earth had evolved beyond the empires of conquest. And yet here they were, wrapping chains in silk and calling it honor. He couldn't refuse her. The file made that clear. To reject the reward was to trigger a full psychological reassessment and mandatory reinstatement. A veiled threat, but a precise one. Retire as planned, accept what's given, play, your part in peace. That was the price of freedom. And so, at 0300, when the door signaled a secure drop, he stood in the atrium in a robe he hadn't worn before, barefoot, his jaw unshaved, his chest hollowed out by dread, and watched as the delivery agents rolled in a low-gravity transport, pod, clear-sided, sterile, humming softly with internal stasis fields. She lay inside, curled but alert, eyes open, unblinking, not sedated, not restrained, just watching him as if she already understood everything. Her skin was a pale opalescent hue, smooth but not reflective, like the surface of mother-of-pearl beneath a thin mist. Her hair, or what resembled it, was dark with silver streaks falling like slow liquid across her shoulder. No clothes except a simple garment of synth cloth that marked her as neither prisoner nor civilian, just a shape with no context. She did not move as the field lowered and the pod hissed open. She rose slowly, not with caution, but with the elegance of someone long past fear. She stepped out barefoot, the soles of her feet making no sound on the synthetic marble floor, and met his eyes with no trace of emotion. He had expected resistance or rage or tears, but what she gave him was worse. Silence. A silence so profound it seemed to erase the walls between them. "Kaelari," he said, her name foreign on his tongue. She did not confirm it. She did not deny it. She simply stood, arms at her sides, expression unreadable. The delivery agents gave him a brief nod, transfer complete, and left. Just like that, no instructions, no guidance, no farewell. Rourke led her inside, slow and deliberate, speaking in calm, clear tones. "There's a room prepared for you," he said, gesturing down the hall. "You're not a prisoner. No locks, no restraints. You'll have privacy, food, safety. If you need anything, you can ask." She said nothing. Not even a blink. She followed him, but never trailed behind. Never walked with the posture of someone obeying. It unnerved him. She moved like a shadow with her own source of light. The room was simple. Soft bed, clean clothes, amenities tailored for humanoid physiology. She entered without hesitation, walked to the window and looked out. The glass was smart shielded, reflecting the soft lavender haze of the Earth moonrise. Rourke waited for her to speak. She didn't. He left without another word, unsure who he had just brought into his home or what they had made her into. Over the next days she spoke nothing. Ate in silence. Walked in silence. Her presence was never disruptive, never overtly hostile, but always felt. She had a gravity to her, as if reality folded subtly around her frame. Sometimes he would catch her watching the news, images of rebuilding cities, memorials, and alliance, officers giving hollow speeches. Her expression remained still, not indifferent, not cold, just distanced, as though all of this was something she had seen before, in other forms, under other suns. Rourke tried not to treat her like a prisoner. He didn't give her orders, he didn't ask for service. He tried earnestly to make the house feel like a place she could exist in, not as property, but as person. But she gave him nothing in return, not hostility, not warmth, just presence. It unnerved him. The more he tried to understand her, the more he found himself reflecting on his own role in the war. On the orders followed, the lives taken, the buildings leveled under precision strikes. He had never seen her world. He had never set foot on Varian soil. Most of the operations had been orbital, surgical, clean. They were told the Varians were dangerous, elusive, genetically unpredictable, that their cities hid weapons, that their peace was a lie. Rourke had never seen any of that firsthand. He had trusted the chain of command. He had fired when told. Now the war was over, and his reward was silence in humanoid form, living in his house, breathing the same air, walking, his halls like a ghost draped in dignity. Then came the dreams. At first fragmented, flashes of light, underwater stars, a feeling of falling upward through crystal air. Then names he didn't recognize whispered in languages he didn't speak. Not nightmares, not visions, just sensations he could not explain, memories that were not his. He would wake with phrases in his head he couldn't place. Elon Drasta, Talvir Akal. He began to wonder if she was doing something to him, reading his mind, projecting her memories into his. It wasn't impossible. Telepathic residue had been rumored among certain Varian bloodlines, though never confirmed. Still, she never looked at him with recognition, never hinted at control. But the dreams persisted, deepened, wove into his waking hours. He began to see flashes of her in his periphery when she wasn't there, hear whispers when he was alone. He confronted her once, stood at the threshold of her room and asked, "What are you?" Not in anger, not in accusation, in need. She turned to him, her expression finally shifting, just a breath. Her eyes met his, and for the first time something moved there. Not emotion exactly, but a shadow of knowing. And then she turned back to the window and said nothing. The house felt colder after that, more real, as if her silence had been permission for him to forget, and now it was revoked. He reread her file again and again, hoping to find a flaw, a hint, a loophole. He found one line he had overlooked before: genetic anomaly potentially of interest. To strategic biological division, subject temporarily reassigned to field personnel for observation. Observation, not reward, not gift, a test. He wasn't being honored, he was being studied. He was the petri dish. She was the catalyst. And that was when he realized he had been chosen not because of valor, but because he was predictable, loyal, trusted. A man they could afford to lose should things go wrong. He was not the recipient of a prize. He was a variable in an experiment. And Kaelari, She was the fuse. The moment he saw it, the illusion cracked. She was here for a reason. The dreams, the silence, the watching. She was not broken. She was waiting. And whatever she carried inside her, whether memory, power, or something the war had tried to bury, was meant to wake. But not yet. Not until he chose. Not until he asked the question buried under the one they had told him to live with. Not what is she, but why her? Why me? And what happens when I stop playing their game? The silence between Elias Rourke and Kaelari became something tangible, no longer just an absence of sound but a living presence, like a third entity residing in the house with them, moving through the vents, coiling in corners, settling like a mist against the windows no matter how bright the morning sun tried to be. The estate, built to impress dignitaries and indulge weary heroes, began to feel more like an observatory turned inward. Its polished surfaces and echoing halls seemed less like a home and more like a sterile container, a test chamber with two beings inside and no control group. Rourke tried in his quiet, fumbling way to be kind. He asked if she preferred warm or cold meals, if the lighting in her room was suitable, if she needed translated literature or music. She never answered, not directly. Sometimes she would, accept the tray of food with a small mechanical nod. Sometimes she would walk out into the garden and sit beneath the artificial eucalyptus tree, staring not at the sky, but at the grass, as if deciphering messages written in the blades. He left her alone at first, thinking she needed time, space, dignity, whatever she had been denied before arriving here. But as days turned to weeks, and her behavior neither escalated nor softened, he began to suspect her silence was not a shield. It was a statement, not defiance, not fear, something older, quieter, as if she knew that the burden of speaking first was his, and she would not relieve him of it. He watched her through the house's passive systems, not as a voyeur but as a guardian unsure of what he was guarding. She never tried to leave, never tampered with the doors or the comms. She accessed no data systems, left no fingerprints on unauthorized surfaces. And yet he felt her everywhere, like the house was slowly bending around her presence, reshaping itself to accommodate a truth too large to name. He found himself listening for her breath. He didn't mean to. It just happened. At night, when the estate dimmed to sleep mode and the rooms fell still, he would lie in his bed, gaze at the slow rotation of a ceiling fan he didn't need, and strain to hear if she was awake, if she was moving. More than once he rose without reason and walked the hallway barefoot as if drawn. More than once he stopped outside her door and listened. Never once did she seem startled. One night, he found her standing in the central observatory, looking up through the open dome, the night sky spilling above them in high-resolution clarity, the real stars pulsing beyond the planet's thin exosphere. Her hands were clasped loosely in front of her, her posture still, her face tipped upward with an expression he couldn't read. Reverence, mourning, perhaps nothing at all. He said her name. Just once. Softly. She didn't turn, but she spoke. Her voice was low, textured, and not what he expected. Not cold, not alien, but steeped in memory, like something aged in silence too long. They erase what they fear, she said. Not a greeting, not an answer. Just a line pulled from a wound deeper than the skin. Rourke stood there, still as the machines, and waited for more. She offered none. The next day, she did not speak. Again. But the balance between them had shifted. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt full, laden with implications. Rourke began digging through files he wasn't cleared to access, burning favors with old war contacts, invoking codes he'd once used to save lives on the front lines. Kaelari's name brought up blank records, dead links, and one flagged entry buried under 6 layers of encryption. Bio signal classified. Strategic potential. Unconfirmed. Observe for emergent ability triggers. That was all. She was a test case. A trigger waiting to be pulled. But for what? What ability? What threat? What power could live so quietly in a body that had never once raised its voice? Then came the incident. A power surge, small but precise. Every screen in the house flashed white for 3 seconds, then went dark. The backup systems came online. No data loss, no breach, nothing, except a spike in the biometric feed from her room. Heart rate elevated. Electromagnetic signature abnormal. When he checked the footage, he saw her seated cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, breathing slowly. Around her, the air shimmered, barely but visibly, like the space around her was rejecting the laws of temperature. He had the footage scrubbed before central monitoring flagged it. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't confront her. But he knew then that she had chosen to reveal that, just enough to warn him or perhaps to see what he would do with the knowledge. Still, she remained quiet, watching, observing him as surely as he observed her. One morning she stood in the kitchen holding a small fruit he hadn't seen her touch before. She turned it in her hand and said, "You do not ask questions that matter." Rourke, stunned by her voice, responded too slowly. "What questions matter?" he asked, stepping closer. Her eyes met his, pale silver, reflective without being metallic. "Why you? Why now? Why me?" Then she placed the fruit down, untouched, and left the room. The phrase echoed. Why him? He had asked that from the beginning, but only in the privacy of his mind. She wanted him to ask it aloud, to force the question into the world. So he did. He stood in her doorway that night and asked, "Why were you sent to me?" She sat on the floor near the window, knees drawn up, arms around them. "Because you're quiet," she said. "Because you kill precisely." The answer stunned him with its simplicity. "I'm not the only one who fits that description. But you don't lie to yourself afterward." He felt the weight of her words settle deep. "And what are you?" he asked, voice hushed. "To them?" "A leftover," she said. "A warning, a key. They don't know which. That's why they watch." "Are you dangerous?" he asked. She turned her head slowly, like the question amused her. "Only if made to be." The tension between them was a thin string stretched across a blade. She hadn't moved, hadn't raised her voice, but she had just confirmed what he feared. She was not a passive reward. She was an unlit match, and they had placed her in his hands to see what he would do. "Do you want to be free?" he asked, surprising himself with the bluntness. She didn't answer. Not at first. Then softly, "I want to be known, not owned." The difference in the words cracked something open in him. All this time he'd been offering her choice, comfort, dignity. But none of those were the same as recognition. He was still playing their game, calling her guest instead of property, but never asking who she had been before she became a file. That night, he accessed an old data tablet, blank and unlinked to the central net, and placed it outside her room with a stylus and a line. "You can tell me who you are, if you want." The tablet remained untouched for days. Then, one morning, it was gone. In its place was a new tablet. On it, a single sentence, written in looping, elegant strokes. "You will not believe me until you see." That was the moment he knew. This was not about peace, not about mercy. Kaelari was the continuation of the war. A quieter one, a deeper one. And the reason she was sent to him was not because of what he had done, but because of what they expected he might still do. They were watching him, measuring him, waiting for something to either break or begin. And she was no longer silent. She was listening for the question that would finally make her speak without restraint. Elias Rourke was no longer afraid, but he was no longer certain of anything, and in that uncertainty something powerful was starting to wake. Elias Rourke awoke before the house systems began their soft sunrise simulation, the windows still dark with the velvet blue of a pre-dawn sky. His breath caught somewhere between anticipation and dread, as though the silence had changed again. Overnight, No longer a waiting silence, but the kind that follows an answer you didn't want to understand. He sat up slowly, not because of pain, but because some unspoken weight pressed into his shoulders. The echo of Kaelari's words, still humming beneath his skin like an aftershock. You will not believe me until you see. He didn't know what she meant, not exactly, but he knew, on some level deeper than intellect, that whatever she would show him would not be something he could return from. Truth, when it's been caged too long, doesn't come out softly. He stepped into the hallway, barefoot, the floors cool and humming beneath the artificial gravity stabilizers, and as he approached the corridor leading to the east wing where Kaelari spent most of her time, he noticed the scent first, something sharp and strange, ozone laced with something floral and alien. The door to her quarters was slightly ajar. She never left it open. He pushed it the rest of the way, the hinges responding without resistance, and stepped inside. The lights were off, but the room was not dark. In the center of the floor hovered an image, a projection, but not one produced by any human tech he recognized. It pulsed softly in midair, a sphere of shifting colors and symbols, runes etched in luminous bands like planetary rings spiraling around an invisible core. Kaelari stood beside it, not touching it, not even looking at it. Her gaze fixed instead, on him, watching him see. This is what they erased, she said, voice low but sure, as if the weight of history rested in her throat. This is what I carry. Rourke approached slowly, drawn into the gravity of it, his eyes scanning the impossible display, each symbol a language, each band a history, and at the center of it all, something flickering in and out of existence, as if reality couldn't fully contain it. What is it? He asked. My world, she said, the archive of it, the breath of it. What's left? He looked at her then, really looked, and saw what had been there all along but hidden beneath the quiet. The weariness of someone who had seen everything they loved turned to data and ash, the resolve of someone who carried not vengeance but remembrance, not rage but reverence. You're a historian, he said. No, she replied, stepping forward. I am a vault. And suddenly he understood. The reward wasn't Kaelari herself. It was what she preserved, what lived inside her like a secret they couldn't risk storing anywhere else. She wasn't meant to be protected. She was meant to be contained. Rourke felt the breath leave his lungs. Why me? He asked again, more softly this time, not in anger, not in self-pity, just in raw need. She turned away from the sphere, letting it spin behind her like a sun. Because you were the only one who refused the last reward you were given, she said. The command knew. They watched. You saved a boy who should have died because it was efficient, and you spared a city you were ordered to burn because it was wrong. They knew you would not treat me as a prize. They hoped you might. Never even open the box. But I did, he murmured. I opened it. She looked back at him then, something unspoken blooming in her eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or something more ancient. Yes, she said. You did. For the first time, he noticed her trembling, not visible in her hands or her stance, but somewhere deeper, like her very presence flickered just slightly at the edges, as if her connection to this world was fraying. Are you dying? He asked, too sharply. No, she said, but the archive is failing. Time in your space corrodes. The memories need to be passed on before they fragment beyond retrieval. Passed on? He echoed. To who? Her gaze did not waver. To you. He took a step back without meaning to, instinct recoiling even as his mind grasped for understanding. That's not possible, I'm not. You are, she said, more than you know. It's not about biology. It's about willingness, about capacity. You've held death in your hands without being consumed. That makes you capable of holding life. The projection pulsed behind her, brighter now, its core flickering rapidly. If you take it, she continued, you will see what I saw, feel what I felt. You will carry them with you, not as words, but as experience. But if you refuse, then I will decay, and they will be gone forever. Rourke stood at the edge of something vast. This was not a reward. This was not even a choice. This was a moment the universe bent around, when a single decision would echo forward, altering trajectories no algorithm could predict. "Why can't you keep carrying it?" he asked, searching her face. "Because I was not built to survive." In stillness, she whispered. "My people were nomads of the stars, minds wired for motion, for expansion. Being kept here, tethered, watched, inert, it frays us. It breaks the tether between memory and meaning. I was never meant to be idle. I was never meant to be alone." That last word cut through him. Alone? Yes, that was the truth buried deepest. Not what she knew, not what she carried, but the fact that she had done so alone. And now, for the first time, she asked to share the burden. Rourke didn't know how to say yes. So he stepped forward. That was answer enough. The light from the sphere shifted, narrowed, and extended like a tendril toward him. It brushed his forehead. Not searing. Not cold, but deeply present, like a flood of sensation that was neither pain nor pleasure. Only remembrance. And suddenly, he saw. Not with eyes, but with some inner vision. Whole cities suspended in trees. Oceans of crystal minds, beings who spoke in gravity pulses and laughter that bent time. He saw Kaelari as a child, silver-skinned and barefoot, chasing kinetic light beasts across a sky bridge. He saw her as a scholar, kneeling before an elder, receiving a memory seed with reverent hands. He saw her running through smoke, the archive, in her chest burning like a second heart, her people falling one by one as the sky was torn open by ships not meant to exist. He saw her captured, bound, but never broken. And then he was back, gasping, knees buckling. Kaelari caught him. "It will pass," she said softly. "The first wave is always the hardest." His hands trembled. His eyes stung. "How do you live with this?" She touched her chest just over her heart. "You don't. You become it." The projection dimmed, its energy now woven into him. He felt it like a presence just behind thought, not invasive, but vast, a galaxy of echoes, all resting within him. He looked at her, this woman who had been handed to him as property and had instead become the single most important threshold he'd ever crossed. "What happens now?" he asked. Kaelari looked toward the window, where the first threads of light broke across the sky. "Now," she said, "we prepare, because they will come for you." "Who?" "The ones who erased my people," she said. "The ones who believed you could hold me without understanding me. They watched for signs. The signal has changed. You've accepted it. They'll try to silence it. Then we fight," Rourke said without hesitation. She looked at him with something close to reverence. "Not yet," she said. "First we remember. That's how we win." And as the sun rose, the silence between them did not return. It had transformed. No longer absence, but alliance. No longer an emptiness between captor and captive, but the shared quiet between two who had seen too much and still chosen to stand together. Rourke would never be the same. Neither would she. And somewhere far above them, in the cold halls of command centers and darkened war rooms, red lights began to flicker, alerts sounding not for warships or weapons, but for something far more dangerous. A memory that refused to die. A truth that now had a human voice. And a soldier who had finally learned what it meant to carry more than orders. He carried a people, he carried a legacy, and the war was only beginning. The first time Elias Rourke said her name aloud, it was not deliberate. It slipped past his lips like a breath too full of memory to stay caged. A whisper in the dark when he thought she was asleep. But she wasn't. And the sound of it seemed to change the shape of the air between them. Like speaking her into the open world finally made her real in a way he hadn't known how to before. "Kaelari." And she turned toward him from where she lay curled beneath the pale light of the reading lamp, her silver hair pooled against the cushion. Her eyes unreadable but softer than before, as if hearing her name spoken without command, without question, had reached some inner part of her that all the quiet respect in the world had never quite touched. And she said nothing, only watched him for a long moment that hung in the space between breath and something like ache. And in that suspended stillness he understood that a name, spoken right, can be a kind of vow, unspoken but understood, a promise that she was no longer a mystery he feared to unravel, but a truth he was willing to carry all the way to its end, whatever that might mean. And so from then on he said it more often, never carelessly, but never as if it were forbidden, letting it settle between them like a rhythm the house had waited too long to hear. Kaelari, at the threshold when he brought her tea. Kaelari in the garden when she paused to feel the rain on her skin. Kaelari, when her shoulders tensed at night from holding too much silence too long, and each time she said nothing in return. But her eyes changed, and her body eased in the smallest ways, like a memory uncoiling, and slowly she began to say his name, not in the formal, mechanical way she had once spoken, Commander Rourke, but quietly, as if it were a secret she was trying on for shape. Elias, and the first time she said it without prompting, it was because he had just returned from town with new shielding plates for the outer dome, and a faint cut ran down his cheek from an engineer's careless crate corner, and she reached for him without thinking, her fingers cool against his face, and whispered his name like it was not a warning but a tether. And in that moment something shifted, so small it could have gone unnoticed, yet so vast it restructured everything beneath it. Because when two people stop being pieces in a game and start becoming mirrors, the rules don't just change, they dissolve. And Rourke saw it then, saw her not as the sum of what she carried, not as a symbol of some hidden rebellion or cosmic archive, but as a person forged in the crucible of survival, resilience wrapped around grief, intelligence wrapped around silence. And for the first time, he allowed himself to want, not possession, not answers, but proximity, the unbearable ache of wanting to be close without asking for it. And maybe she saw it in him too, because the next night she sat beside him on the low bench beneath the synthetic moonlight in the solarium, and told him something not even the archive had stored. "I was once loved," she said, voice distant, steady. "Before the fall, before the war, his name was Thalen, and he spoke in colors. He wove emotion into light, and when he touched me, the stars dimmed." And Rourke said nothing, not out of jealousy but reverence, because memory deserves silence to bloom, and she continued, "I watched him die. He unspooled his mind to feed the archive before they reached us, before they burned the core. And I haven't said his name aloud since." And Rourke understood that what she had given him was not just a confession but a key, a door opened not for closure, but for the courage to keep going. And when he finally spoke, he said only, "Then, I'll remember it too." And she nodded once, the way someone does when they receive not sympathy but understanding. And after that the nights grew longer and less cold, and the quiet between them less sharp. And in the hush of shared hours they developed a language that was not built of sentences but of presence. He would leave her drawings of constellations he couldn't name, and she would alter them with symbols from her memory, creating star maps that no longer belonged to one sky but two. And sometimes she would sit cross-legged and show him how to pulse sound in patterns that soothed neural fatigue. And he would teach her old Earth poems he'd memorized from his mother's tattered books. And somewhere in that slow accumulation of small, patient gestures, they stopped being a soldier and a symbol and became something else. Something not yet named, but deeply known. And it was in the quiet of one such night, when the stars pulsed low and the power grid hummed in sleep state, that the alarms finally triggered. Not a false read, not a glitch, but a sharp, high warning tone, pulsing red across every surface. And Kaelari was on her feet before he even moved, her eyes already dilated with knowledge she hadn't voiced, and Rourke tapped the console embedded in his wrist and saw the readings. 2 incoming crafts, unmarked, shielded, silent entry, no registered identification codes. And Kaelari said only, "They've come to extract the signal." And he nodded, every part of him switching from soft to steel in an instant, not because he wanted to fight, but because this was the moment the war had been waiting for. Not fought on a battlefield, but inside one man's home, inside one man's heart. And the line had already been drawn. He had already chosen. So when the door burst open with the kinetic blast of an exterior override, and two armored figures moved in fast, plasma rifles aimed, he didn't hesitate. He ducked left, fired a stun pulse that shorted the lead assailant's shield pack, dropped him clean, and Kaelari moved like light. No hesitation, her body a blur of memory triggered grace, no weapons but her voice and a motion of her hand that made the second intruder seize mid-step, collapse, writhing under a silent frequency, and when the silence returned, it wasn't peace. It was tension coiled, waiting, because these two were scouts, not the storm, and Rourke looked at her, panting, blood rising, and said, "We can't, stay here." And she nodded. "They'll burn it." And he said, "Then we take the archive elsewhere." And she stepped forward, touched his chest, not for comfort but as if confirming something within him was ready, and said, "You're carrying it now. It goes where you go." And he said, "Then we go together." And the decision was not dramatic, not spoken like a vow. It was already true, had been since the day he let her name settle in his chest and make a home there. And so they left, not fleeing but moving forward, two figures against a horizon that no longer held safety but purpose. And as the first line of smoke rose from the hills behind them, from the distant crumbling edge of what once was a sanctuary, Kaelari turned to look back, not in sorrow but in farewell, and said, "Let it burn. What matters is ahead." And Rourke said nothing, only reached for her hand, and to his surprise she let him take it, her fingers cool and real and steady in his, and together they walked into a world that was not ready for what they had become. Not weapon, not archive, but truth alive and armed with memory. And as they disappeared into the wind shadow of the rising dawn, her voice reached him once more, softer than all the alarms and louder than any war. "You never once asked what my name means." And he looked at her, smiling despite the weight of what was coming, and asked, "What does it mean?" And she said, "The one who stays when all else falls." And he whispered her name one more time, Kaelari. And this time she answered with his. And the war, wherever it was, had already lost something it could never take back.